All right, today in my interview, I have not one, but two very special guests. If you check out the DECA Global Leaderboard, you're going to see both these names among the fastest times for the strong, mile, fit, and teams. Today, I wanted to welcome Aaron Nolan and Glen Race. How you guys doing today?
Pretty
Doing
good.
great.
Awesome. So I got to witness the fastest mile teams time that's been posted this year, which was pretty amazing between the two of you. So I'm super excited to have both of you on, talk a little bit about your thoughts, training, experience, a little bit of everything to help some of our listeners out whether they're trying to improve their DECA time or other kind of hybrid race or just more traditional OCR and Spartan races, things like that. So Glenn, I wanted to start with you. First off, what do you do when you're not kicking ass with OCR? And then how did you kind of first get into OCR?
Oh yeah, good question. When I'm not doing OCR right now, I'm not training. I live in Temecula, California. Just married, have 5 kids. Kids age range from 2 to 14. So between working as a mechanical engineer full time and luckily get to work remote, so that opens things up schedule wise, but then also got the kids all doing sports throughout the week, and yeah, just keeping busy with those things. And so that's currently a little brief snapshot of kind of what fills my time these days when I'm not training. But as far as what got me into OCR initially was I started in 2013. I guess I was into just like road running since I getting out of college in 2001 in Santa Barbara, and I wanted something to do besides to kind of keep me busy when I'm not surfing. And I was starting my engineering job and just sitting around all day, so I wanted just to get up for some runs here and there. And it started getting into road 5Ks and half marathons from like 2003 till 2013, that 10-year chunk. Just kind of built, just started with 5Ks and got to some marathons and half marathons. We're just trying to figure out how to do the running thing, building up an aerobic base. Ended up getting 5K times in the mid to low 15 minutes and had like a 113 half marathon. So got to that level of fitness. And suddenly I heard about in 2013, that was kind of 10 years ago, and that was 10 years from getting into running. I heard about this thing called American Ninja Warrior, and my friend and I, we submitted it. He helped me submit a video, and it got in, luckily. And so then in 2013, I really started transitioning to thinking, oh, wow, this obstacle thing is kind of fun. So I got into doing these grip strength obstacles for Ninja Warrior and had a pretty weak run at the event in Venice. But it's still funny to watch it on YouTube because they put it up. It's one of the ones I wasn't highlighted on the show, but it's just funny to see the way I went about it, very methodically and slow. And but it's fun to look back, and that's 10 years now. It's crazy. And but I tried to get on that ever since. The next 2 years, never made it back on the Ninja Warrior, but I had the bug, the desire to kind of the itch to get into more obstacle racing, and I saw that Spartan racing was a little more accessible, and so started diving into doing that. And I saw that Spartan is one of the obstacle races that actually gives some prize money, and that's kind of how I've always been like, well, if I have an incentive, I'm going to go for it. So I kind of transitioned from road running in 2013 to do some more obstacle racing, and I did my first Spartan race in the end of 2013 and got on the Spartan Pro team in early 2014, and then that gave me more incentives to just continue that pursuing the niche of not just running, not obstacles like the Ninja Warrior, but the hybrid mix of obstacle training. So from then on, I for the next 8 years or so, I just did all Spartan training and continued to be able to ramp up my volume, learned a lot. It's similar to running in that just kind of also had the extra try to grow the skill set of all of the obstacles and to be proficient and to run well after doing a sandbag carry, and get into a lot of hill training and hill running. And there's not much near here Temecula where I'm at now, but you kind of do the best with what you have and find the incline treadmills and whatnot. So that was my life for quite a lot, the training life for me for about 8 years. But then the last couple of years now, I started really getting into a year and a half, got into the DecaFit and doing that type of really hybrid training where I feel like it's best described because you compared to obstacle racing, where VJ's described it as obstacle racing with Spartan is mostly running, and then the obstacles is a little bit of a break. Like the spear throw, it's quite a break. You're aerobically, you're cooling down, your heart rate's actually cooling off while you're doing most of these obstacles. And that's kind of a good way to put it relative to now in hybrid racing, these obstacles, which they call them zones, are actually almost harder than the running part, depending on how you want to structure it. So a lot of the obstacles will actually take a lot more out of you, and then you're doing what's truly called compromised running at that point for all your runs after the first couple runs. You're really going at a much slower pace than you would if you, let's say, your typical 5K pace. So getting into this new world of like how to really train this well and how to work on these obstacles and zones that they have now has been a fun new pursuit. And it's kind of exciting for me as kind of doing Spartan for so long, done everything from stadium, short racing. I even did the 3K in Big Bear earlier this year to doing 24. I've done 3 different 24-hour long races, some relay, and I've done to Iceland and Sweden myself. So I've gone through the gambit of like the different types of races you could do within Spartan and obstacle racing. So go diving into this and having Yancey start up this new wing of Spartan that gets you really into the hybrid world has been kind of fun and refreshing and exciting. Starting, I mean, last year I was 42, so getting into it into my master's years hasn't been too much of a problem. I'm certainly not as don't have some of the leg speed as I did 10, 15 years ago, but it's still fun to be able to be competitive at this level. Like you said, Mike, just Aaron and I being able to push the envelope and get some decent times on your Deca Mile course. And yeah, it's been a fun journey this past year working with, done I think at least 4 Deca Miles at your gym at San Diego Premier Training, and been yeah, battling Aaron ever since. And I feel like I've had the edge on you, Aaron, ever since these last couple of weeks ago when you took me down at the Deca Mile. And yeah, it's very fun having a couple guys like you and John Clark, a few other Masters guys really pushing the limits. And you guys have a couple of years on me too, so it's actually inspiring to see you guys still crushing it at in 45 to 49 range. And I know Clark's turning 50 this next year. So yeah, I'm actually yeah, you make me feel young. So thanks a lot, Aaron.
I mean, it's awesome on my end to, you guys coming out and seeing what you do over the last couple of years, and you brought up some great stuff that I definitely want to pick both your guys' brains on training, because this is different, right? It's not a traditional obstacle course run. This is something totally different. So it'll be great to pick your guys' brains a little bit. And actually, I didn't know. I just was doing some research, and I didn't realize you were on American Ninja Warrior. I did find your video. I'll make sure to post it in the show notes for this
Nice.
episode so everybody can see your pace. It's a little different, your pace for the court for that, and watching you run a deck a mile. So um
Slightly.
Aaron, so same thing. What are you doing when you're not training, and how'd you first get into it?
Um, so when I'm not training, I'm similar to Glenn. I have 5 kids, 3 step kids, future step kids. I'm engaged, and two daughters of my own. And I work as a therapist, a social worker and a therapist, and it gives me a certain amount of like freedom, flexibility to find time to train. I definitely enjoy running. Uh, love working out. It's one of my best stress relievers, but also I just look forward to it because it's fun. Um, as far as like my background, I would say I'm a kind of an eclectic athlete. Like I like tennis. I grew up. My first sport was t-ball, but then I wasn't very good at baseball, so I gravitated to basketball, pickup games, and then in high school I swam and played water polo. Joined the military at 18, and that's really where I found running and started doing some 5Ks and stuff like that. Nothing serious, but I really enjoyed running, especially with the military schedule, because it's not always time to go to a gym or what have you if you're working in the middle of the night. And then kind of going circling back a little bit to when I was in high school on the swim team at a swim banquet at a person's house. They had a video of the Hawaii Ironman of Polly Newby Fraser, which Glenn, you might be familiar with this video of her breaking down at the end of the Ironman. And it was just so inspiring to kind of conceptualize what people are capable of doing. So somewhere around that age, I went from sports as being fun as really enjoying the idea of pushing myself. I was never really great. I still am not really great at anything, but I like the challenge of seeing if I can get better. And so I started doing triathlon. But something I've learned as I've done ultra runs, I'm not a very long-term athlete. Marathon, I don't do very well. Somewhere after like 2 hours, I just start to kind of fall apart. And I can hang in with grit, like doing a 50-mile run or something, but I kind of fall apart. And so I don't enjoy it as much, even though I enjoy the grit of it. So as I've gotten older and I've done all these different things, the thing that's been constant was running. And then I would say about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I went from running to more like trail running specific, hills in the local San Diego area, and got into Spartan racing in 2017. That was so much fun, where I could use a little bit of my strength and my running. I was never really great at it or anything, but I pushed myself. I started training Urgent in 2017. It's a great memories, and but I would say that was the beginnings of learning what a hybrid athlete was, which I basically say it's a combination of cardiovascular activity and strength. And High Rocks is a great example of that. And High Rocks is different than Deca, but so are like some of these stadium courses where there's a lot of stairs and there's climbing obstacles. So I differentiate from Glen a little bit in the way that, like, I don't get a break on the obstacles. I know, like the monkey bars, those will jack my heart rate up. Z-wall, I get super amped up on that one too. And so I've kind of learned how to do that. And the transition from one of the things I really like about Deca and High Rocks is it's more fitness oriented. And so along the way of me, like my own athletic journey, I'm really a fan of the sport. Like I love Olympic sports and exercise physiology, and some of the stuff you've shown me about, like flexibility and how training philosophy, like threshold training versus VO2 max. I love VO2 max theory, mitochondria, something that is amazing, and those type of things. And so the idea is the more that I know about those things and I practice them, I can actually improve my body. So last year, I'm not trying to be boastful, but I would never have thought this possible. I ran my fastest mile I'd ever run at 43. To me, that's pretty cool. And I would never have thought that was possible when I was 37. When I was 37, like breaking 5 minutes in the mile was like, no way. And quick side story, when I was I think I was 36, give or take. I'm going to grad school at Cal State San Marcos, and Glenn knows where I'm going with this. And I would wake up in the morning early before school, and I would run on the track. And so one day I'm running on the track, and there's this dude there who's running on the track, at 5:30 in the morning, and he's also doing sandbag lunges in between intervals. And I'm just like, who is this guy? And around the same time, I was watching the Spartan National Championship Series on NBC, and it's like, that's Glenn. He was doing these crazy reps after he was doing the lunges, and I was just so impressed by it. And so that's my first introduction to Glenn, uh, you know, up close and personal. And so we have a nice little bit of history. But the idea is that's the kind of idea, right? How do you run fast after you do a lunge? How do you run? Or the question that's on everybody's mind is, how do you run and do a hard assault bike? Right? That's what everybody wants to know.
Yeah.
How do you do that? And it's like, it's complicated.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's all really interesting. And one of the big things I wanted to ask both of you guys is you both kind of started more of the running background into obstacle course racing and now doing so well at these hybrid events. So, Aaron, I'll just start with you. What do you think the biggest change you had to make you know, when you were more focusing on the running type obstacle course racing, and then now going more towards the hybrid, was it a drastic change in your training plan? Did you cut down? Is it just cutting down on running and picking up other stuff, or you know, what were some things that you started to play around with?
Well, if I just go to the present day, which is where I feel like I have the best insights into my training, I'd say it's pretty dramatic difference.
Hmm.
Um, and I would attribute this to John Clark a little bit, also Jakob Ingebrigtsen, and also some of like uh, people on the internet, YouTube stuff, like really learning from them. So this is most of the stuff is stuff I heard about and then I adapted. So uh, one thing John's always been banging on me about is I do too many hard VO2 max workouts, and I think that there's a place for them, and I think they're also really, really extremely wasteful. Max workouts are oftentimes more counterproductive than productive. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't go hard, but you should go hard discriminately. So that's a big change from like I used to go hard twice a week, like really hard twice a week, running my threshold runs way outside, way above threshold zone, or just doing intervals way harder than I need to. So that's a big change for me. Not doing, still doing hard stuff. I now do a ton of threshold work. So I probably do 3 to 4 threshold workouts a week, but I try to stay below my threshold zone. I learned that kind of from Jakob Ingebrigtsen, and just that Ingebrigtsen, like do more threshold stuff, don't go hard, but do a lot of hard work. And then I would say about 3 years ago when I first, because I did one of the more earlier on high roxes when they were still doing 25-meter pulls and pushes. It wasn't the 12.5 meter. And I really realized that strength training has a really valuable component. So I used to think like pull-ups would be enough, but now I'm realizing that like there's a really valuable place for things like lunges, squats, um, rows. So I would say the biggest difference between then, which is a huge like benefit to me, is I run a little bit the same, but a lot more threshold work, and I incorporate 2 days of strength training a week pretty religiously. And I think those are the main differences. Before I would never, almost never do strength training.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always like when people bring up it's not hard all the time, right? Because it's hard to get out of that mindset of more is better, right? Just push as hard as you can all the time and you're gonna get better. And maybe short term you might see something out of that, but I just nobody can maintain that. So Glenn, same thing. Did you see yourself making any dramatic changes from that kind of time in your career to now? Oh, you're still muted, Glenn.
Thanks. Yeah. I definitely felt it have noticed a big change because it kind of went from, okay, you'd be good on these obstacles, and so you want to be efficient at that, to now it's you have an advantage instead of not knowing exactly what obstacles Spartan's going to throw at you and what type of course and what the arrangement of the obstacles. You know exactly the spacing between the obstacles, and you know exactly what the obstacles will entail, these zones, these 10 zones for DECA. And I haven't done High Rocks yet, so I'll speak specifically to DECA, but obviously it could carry over to both because they're very similar in their structure and their the way they're uniform, like race to race. So you can really dial in the your splits and your effort levels. So that's helps a lot. And that's I've altered my training because I've been big many years on two principles when training for this is like heart rate. Actually, I still have it on me from earlier. I use this use the armband because it's a lot more accurate than the wrist on mine, for instance, because I don't want to have a heart rate monitor that's can be sketchy and not work some of the time. So I feel like I put a lot of value into getting the stuff that makes sure I could be able to accurately look at my heart rate, kind of like how Aaron was describing, and make sure I'm at the right levels that I want to be. And also I'm big into specificity. So I think it's good to do simulations periodically and strategically when you're periodizing. So, for instance, if you're many weeks out from a race, you don't need to necessarily do a lot of simulations. And so in that way, it's the same. Where like Spartan, I like to simulate races and have my obstacles set up in my yard, and when I go to gyms or whatnot to set things up. So in that way, it's similar. But and in the using my heart rate monitor, that's been another similar thing where I focus on that. And if anything, even more, because you're all doing flat running. When you're running down hills and you're doing certain types of obstacles, the heart rate can be deceiving. You're like, oh, I'm not working that hard running down a steep hill, but you're getting a lot of muscle breakdown and damage from the pounding on down hills. But it's going to be very similar running around a concrete course for all of the Deca Mile and Deca Fit. So it's something where it's helpful to be able to go back and track and see how your race went and how much the type of effort levels you put out, and as well as especially for training to be able to make sure not just on hard workouts where you're going to really want to like push a lot of time on this threshold. And I guess in a sense it is a similar idea where I think getting a lot of work, I'd be the same as Aaron. We're putting a lot of work on threshold is pretty key. And I guess that is relatively similar to the mindset I had going into Spartan as well. But I guess the difference would be then, because I've listed a bunch of similarities in my training, but a difference would be that I don't have a lot of the equipment. Unlike Aaron, I don't have a lot of the equipment at my house, and I didn't put as much effort maybe as I should have, but like into like prioritizing that to have that at my home. So I'm kind of dependent on going to a gym, and it kind of limits the type of training I can do because I only have a ski erg and a rower at this gym or that gym that I go to. So I have to schedule my certain aspects of my training on those days. But so that has been a definite change, and it's been a little harder juggling the making it work because I do prioritize the specificity so that when I get to a certain spot, like a couple weeks before a race, I really want to make sure I'm putting some good work on these, like a ski erg or a bike, for instance, and then I could go right to a assault treadmill and really simulate it very accurately, and which is very new. And I guess in general, that's the other thing would be a lot of gym work. I've never been a member. I kind of prided myself in not being a member of a gym. Sorry, no, but in the past, because I'd be like, oh, I gotta save money, and then I'm just gonna train in the hills, and I'll make obstacles in my house. And that's great. But more recently, I've definitely come to find a lot of value as my treadmills at home have broke, and
Mhm.
they're totaled, and I'm like, oh, this isn't cheap to repair. And it's like, I definitely respect the amount of maintenance and wear and tear that a gym has to take into account when they structure their fees. And I feel like there's more value than I initially put in to going to a gym. And I go to actually two different gyms based on proximity and what type of obstacles equipment they have here in town here in Temecula. But yeah, I definitely see those are a couple big changes I've made.
Yeah. And you might have kind of already answered this already, but let's say you were giving advice to somebody that they like bouncing back and forth, right? They want to run a couple Spartan races. They want to do something like a Deca or a High Rocks. Like how would what advice would you give them to organize their training? Because they're similar, right? You mentioned there's a lot of similarities, but they're different. So if I had maybe, this month I'm going to do a beast, and then next month I'm going to do a Deca, would you have any specific advice that you might give to, hey, think about this or that or whatever it might be?
Yeah, as far as my 2 cents, it would be, and I'm no coach, but I do my own prescribe my own workouts, and I enjoy kind of going through that process of figuring those kind of things out. So yeah, like you said, if it's a beast, then a Deca. If it's a Deca Fit, you're like, okay, a beast would be 2 hours, a Deca Fit's about a half an hour, let's say, ballpark. Wow, I really want to build a good, and you kind of, if you want to be strategic and really race for performance versus just fun and getting through it. But as for
Sure.
performance goes, you want to look at the duration of the race, and you want to make sure you're training, I mean, gosh, build as much base beforehand as possible, right? Because for a 2 hour race, that's so aerobic. So you want to build a base, and then then after the beast, the next month doing a Deca, then you know that, well, you have a good aerobic base, then you just want to just sharpen for your deca. And then those next couple weeks after a little recovery from your beast, you want to just they'll use those last 3 weeks after a recovery week to just get on some of those zones, and practice that. And then because you already have a good base, and maybe do some speed work to get used to the faster effort level and some as much specificity. So on the concrete, or do a couple simulations those next couple weeks. And also you always want to remember which is your A race. Let's say your beast is a B race and your deca is the A race. Then you want to, before your beast, you'll still sprinkle in an appropriate amount of zone work too, so that it's not like total surprise. And it depends, if the distant time between your beast and your deca is short, you want to take that into account, and hey, you might need some recovery. And if you're training from long, slow hill to fast, short concrete, you have to be careful, like make sure your knees can handle the transition. And I'm kind of going through a lot of growing pains myself, having to start, I need to go to the gym. I'm going to start pushing every day. And last year I tweaked my back, my lower back, my shoulder. I'm 40. I'm not 25. I have to
Yeah.
remember I'm not 20 anymore. So all
Yeah.
those things taken into account, not to shift training too fast or too abruptly, is I think important as well.
And I think a good point you were talking about too is, the A versus the B, and maybe you just say, hey, if that beast was my B race, maybe I'm not going to do that one. Maybe I'm gonna find one a couple months before or after my deca, or something like that, so you can
Mm.
really focus. So good points there. I know you have to leave soon, so before you take off, I want to ask both you guys. So you guys put up an incredible team deca mile time. And I don't know if you want to share too many secrets, but whatever you're willing to share for our listeners, what was kind of the strategy or the thought process you guys had going into that? Aaron, if
You
you
can
want to
start off,
start,
Aaron.
or yeah.
Yeah, go for it, Aaron, and then I could finish up.
I'll try to be brief, because to support Glen's time, but there's a little bit to it, right? Like, I think the main thing, if you're going to have a good team or you want to have a good race, is strategy is crucial. And so in this case, even though I envy Glen, I would rather be doing the running. It was more strategic for him to do more of the running. He's a little bit quicker than I am, and I'm a little bit better on some of the stations. And the problem is, if I were to run, I wouldn't be as good on some of the stations. So I would say that was a big deal. Is kind of really being ready to go red line, but then having a balance to who's going to do what. And we did split up. We contemplated splitting up the row, but we found out that it was probably better not to do that. We'd lose more time than we gain. We did split up the skier. That was savvy. We split up the assault bike too. So I'm typically pretty solid on the assault bike, but it was better because if I went full gas for the whole time, I wouldn't be able to do the subsequent stations as well. So Glen did like the first 10 to 12 seconds. And I was actually encouraging him to get off sooner because I'm like, you still got to run, man. And and so we split up the burpees, we split up the tank, and we split up the assault bike a little bit. And doing those things strategically was really valuable. And then at the end of the day, Glen just had to run really fast. I mean, if you see the video of him running, he's going full gas every single rep. And I think you have to be willing to send it, and you also have to be willing to be strategic. And so and I'll just add one last thing. The mistake that a lot of people make is they send it too early, or they send it in a place that they're not really able to do it. So like some people go really hard on the row, and I just kind of laugh. I'm kind of like, oh yeah, good job. You gained 8 seconds, and you just blew yourself up. Or you go too hard on the skier. I don't think you can go too hard on the step ups or the sit ups, or you go too hard on the assault bike. If you go too hard on the assault bike, you could be wanting to walk at the end there of the mile, or even just barely getting the ball over your shoulder. So I think it's really important to pace strategically, but also to send it when you can. So that's kind of my thing, is I know I can go really hard on the assault bike and I can recover afterwards. I've learned that through trial and error.
Yeah, you better, because Glen's running. You don't really get a recovery. He's back,
No,
and then you're off. Yeah.
I was cracking up, man. I was barely out of the row. Like I was having a hard time getting my feet out of the straps, and he's already heading back. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
I went all out on that row for the team, man. I was dying.
Yeah.
Maybe we should if it's like that again, I could like do the first couple steps. No, just kidding. I don't know. Yeah. It's like, it is fun. It is a fun thing though, guys, to like be able to, the way they have it set up with Yancey, it's all right if I'm a couple minutes after. And the way Yancey set it up, with the mile to be able to, and all of the events to be able to do this team like this. And it's a relay, not like you both have to do the whole thing. You just have to
Mhm.
make physical contact, then you go. And there's a definite excitement to that, which I did last year with Kevin, aka Bubbles. We did a Deca Fit team together, and that was fun. It's even more strategic because then you could break the run because it's 2 loops for the 500
Mhm.
meters. They break it into 2 sections, so you can tag team and do half the run. And I think there's strategy in that too. Whereas a Deca Mile, it's almost a little easier. You don't have to think about splitting up the 160-meter run. It's just a real one person obviously just does it. So there's a little less to worry about, but I do like, yeah, exactly what, so I think my last 2 cents would be, it really helps to know your skills and how you handle on all of the zones and the runs. And then Aaron then knows how well he is on everything. And then you combine that and you just kind of strategize that. And we actually met up at his place, the week or 2 before to really have a good feel for how we're going to do these handoffs and, okay, what does it feel like to do a run and then jump for me and to do 10 or 15 seconds of hard bike, and then I only get 20-ish seconds because Aaron's a beast on the bike to recover before my run. And that run hurt the most for me, even though I got some recovery, but it just didn't seem like enough. And so, but it's a good balance though, because so we just like having those little tweaks were helpful, because if he was like a Bubbles Kevin guy who can do the bike in like 17 seconds, that would be another story, where it's like, it's not worth me transitioning, just that 5-second transition is not worth it, but then Kevin, he has his weaknesses and strengths too. So yeah, being able to optimize that for us was good. And we made it a little an audible on call, because I was only supposed to do the third back and forth on the tank, but after Aaron like killed it so hard on the previous 2 zones on the bike and the shoulder overs, we found that it was helpful for me to do the third and fourth push lap on the tank, and then Aaron only did the 5th one because I was feeling a little more recovered because Aaron did all 20 of the shoulder overs at zone 8.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. You don't know how it's going to feel that far in when we're like did our practice thing. So it's nice to know too, to say, have a plan B, right? If my starting to hurt, hey, I could take over an extra tank, or you could do an extra, right? And I could have even maybe tried to do the 5th tank too, because after he did the 5th tank, he was a little more gassed on the last run before we both had to do on that last run before the burpees. So maybe our overall time could have been better if we play around with that too. So it's a lot of fun being able to, within one zone, intermix a lot too. So
Sure.
yeah, love it. And
Yeah.
your setup at the gym was amazing. So yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
And if
And
I
I
may,
mean, if I remember
can I add?
right, the bike you get in 40 seconds. I think, was that your split for the bike? Around 40?
Uh,
It was
I
I
something
think it might
can't
have
insane.
been
remember.
faster than that.
Okay, yeah, it was, you guys weren't even there. It was like I turned around and your Glenn's running again.
And one thing I'd like to add is having a partner that has a real willingness to suffer. So that's one of Glenn's strengths, is he does the practice and the participation, but both of us have a pretty high suffer factor. And I think that everybody doesn't have the same one. So Glen is really willing to work. I was watching him and he just was working so hard the whole time. And so I think you can't half-ass these events. If you're going to really max out, it's not like a 5K or a 10K where you kind of get a rhythm and you kind of stay in your rhythm. And there's a couple hard sections. At some point, it's all hard. And so I just want to say, like, having a willingness and questioning your own willingness to go hard, or having a partner that like choose your partners wisely. Like, choose somebody who's like Glen. I have no doubt Glen will suffer just as much as I will, maybe even more. And I'm like, that's legit. I have a lot of respect for what Glen was working, man. He
Yeah.
worked so freaking. He was at 100.
Glenn, I know if you have to go, that's totally fine. I just have one
Okay.
question on
Yeah.
that topic actually, because I think this is a really hard thing. And Glenn, and Aaron, you watched me do the strong, and I was not willing to basically go there. It blew up in my face. But I think that, do you have any advice for people that are having a hard time getting there, like getting that uncomfortable? And is it just more threshold training? Is there mental tips, anything like that that you guys maybe personally use that help you? Because both of you guys, you're right, 100%. You know, I've watched a lot of these races, and both of you, I know you're not comfortable at all. Like you're redlining the entire time, and you do it. I don't think you ever back down from a fight. So, any tips for either of you guys?
Yeah, before I head out, yeah, a couple things come to mind. I think just having a
Mhm.
good carrot goes a long way, like having that incentive of a race coming up or a time I want to hit, and you have that in your head, and you've kind of visualized where you want to go with it, and oh great, Rylan did a 14:07, like crap. Let's definitely, you know, let's have a goal, and you know that you have a high bar in front of you, so gosh, you can't, you got to give it 100%, and then that helps to motivate, and you have a goal, because if there's no carrot out there, you're like, well, hey, whatever I do, it's going to be a record, or I'm not timing it anyway, so it's no biggie. But
Mm.
you're kind of psyching yourself up for days or weeks beforehand, knowing what the stakes are and the goals are. And then while you're doing that training leading up to that, obviously putting yourself in that position, and that's where the training and the simulations come in, because you're like, oh crap, I've had this feeling and it really hurts, and but I know that's how it goes, and I know I can handle these paces because the training has justified it. Look, I track my heart rate. I track specifically where I'm at when I'm doing different levels of thresholds at 80 to 85% of my max, 85 to 90% of my max. And I track those numbers so I can know where the appropriate amount of level of like the effort I should be putting into any given workout, so that I could max out when I do get to a race and you aren't injured. So I think that combination of really um, tracking your progress and making sure you have those 1 to 2 to 3 really quality workouts per week, where you're putting yourself in that place where that pain and that, or the where it kind of hurts because you're going pretty hard and then you're not quitting. And sometimes they say with Jacob Ingebrigtsen and different pros, like that training is actually puts you in, it's actually harder because you're training multiple times a week, every week. Your race is only once in a while. So that's just, you're just
Yeah,
expressing your fitness, but building up to get to that fitness is the hard part. So yeah, and that mentally definitely goes a long way for me. So yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
cool. Well, thanks guys. Appreciate it. I'm sure Aaron has more to add on, but I'm going to jump off now. But
All
thanks
right.
Yeah,
a
dude.
lot,
Thank
Mike,
you
for
so much,
And
having
Glenn.
me.
Glenn,
Appreciate it.
Glenn, I'll see you soon. Okay, buddy?
Yeah. All right, dude. See you,
All right.
Aaron.
Later,
Take
Glenn.
care. Bye.
Is it okay if I respond to that a little bit,
Yeah,
Mike?
no, I'd love you to. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Keep going.
And I would like to respond to, I actually disagree with Glenn a little bit on something that he said about the beast and the DECA. Um, I think that exercise psychology is just as important as exercise physiology, because how you, again, it's strategy, it's not fitness. Psychology is the strategy, or the thought process of it. And so if if you don't believe in yourself, you're not gonna, and I'm not saying that I believe in myself maybe more than somebody else, but I've been scaffolding, right? I've done a 50-mile race. I've suffered
Mhm.
before. I've done, I've had really bad days and it didn't kill me. And I
Mhm.
think that's the thing, is the more times you go into a really hard place and you don't die, and maybe you feel the exaltation of like, oh my gosh, this was like, I did something so spectacular, whether it's a 15-minute, like when I saw Brian uh do I think he went sub 14, or he went sub 13. I think it was sub 30. I can't remember exactly what time he got, but it was a goal for him. And he was suffering, and he wanted to go faster, but he was able to do that, whatever your goal is. And I think that builds self-efficacy. The more often you work hard and you don't die, you start to develop a little bit more confidence. And I think that builds over time. I think that, and I also think that sometimes people, they misdo it to where they rarely go hard and they go super hard and it's so painful. They're like, I'm never doing that again. That's like the
Yeah.
marathon thing where like, it's like you don't run and then you do a marathon and you're like, I hated that. That was terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't, I don't recommend that to anybody. But if you
Yeah.
can slowly build up your psychological threshold of pushing yourself hard, like the first time I did a Deca Strong, I think I worked harder than I did last week or 2 weeks ago. And I did like a 14:30 and I was like way, but it kept kind of coming down slowly but surely. And so I think obviously if you train smartly, the pain's not as bad, but that's different than having a high threshold for pain.
Hmm.
So if you can do it more efficiently and you have a high threshold for pain, now you're getting optimal, better results, and that's good for your confidence or whatever. And the thing I want to disagree with a little bit about Glen, and not it's not a big disagreement, but if somebody was coming to me and they're like, "What can I do to get better?" I would be like, probably need to run a little bit more for sure
Hmm.
because most people
Hmm.
aren't running enough. And they said I want to do a beast and a deca. I'd be like, that's not a good plan. It's just
Hmm.
not. It's just
Sure.
you're gonna if you're gonna do a beast and a super, I could live with that.
Hmm.
They're so similar. But a beast and a deca, you're talking about a 45-minute to 30 to 45-minute event, depending upon your skill level, or 50,
Hmm.
and then like a 2 to 4 hour event. It's like training for a
Yeah.
marathon or a 5K. I would basically say like, hey, maybe reevaluate your goals. And to that, I would say that the best advice I could give somebody is talk to somebody who knows what they're doing. That's the best advice I can give. Because I think, and I was just talking to John Clark about this 2 hours ago, is I think some of the feedback out there, it's just not very good because hybrid's so new.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, triathlon's the OG hybrid sport, and it's so different from what we're doing because we're truly mixing strength with deck and high rocks or other similar things. It's not like OCR. It's true strength and true cardiovascular. In this case, running. And so, going to somebody who has a little bit of an understanding that they could actually say to you, you probably don't need your long run anymore. You could do like instead of doing say 2 hours, you can probably get bang for your buck with like 80 minutes. And let's spend a little bit of time doing this. And then you get the mix up where it's like somebody's doing too much strength. Like you don't really need a max squat. Like you just need to get like
Hmm.
used to doing the movement efficiently. And that's the
Yeah.
mistake I made last year, whereas I was getting so strong and it was compromising my running because I was like
Hmm.
so sore all the time from all these strength workouts that I wasn't running as efficiently. So yeah, I got stronger. I could push a sled a lot faster, but I was slower as a runner. It's not a
Hmm.
good aggregate. And so the idea I think for me is I would really encourage somebody to be like humble and curious and like, hey, talk to people who know a little bit more. Definitely incorporate strength, but not too much.
Hmm.
uh Definitely incorporate running, but not, you don't really need a lot of hard running, but also you do need to run. So I would say like that's where, being discriminate, like I can't have the marathon and the deca strong. They don't really coexist very well.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think, one thing when I work with a client who has kind of big goals like this, right, where they want to run 5 trifectas in a year or whatever. And I'm not going to tell anybody their goal, but I'll always give my input. And it's first, let's map it out. Let's look at the calendar. And let's say, okay, you're going to do a DECA in January, and then you have a beast in November, right? Like, cool. We can definitely plan for
Absolutely.
this. And but if it's like, all right, I got a DECA in January, a beast in February, 2 DECAs in March, and a lot of people start to fill this, and um it's like you won't be at your best, right? I'm not saying you can't do it. If your goal is, well, I just
Yeah,
want I want to collect medals, I want trifectas, I want to say I did this, who am I to tell you that's not a good goal?
totally.
But if you're coming to me saying I want to run faster or, perform better, I think first thing we have to do is reevaluate that plan because there's just a much better way to do it. And
Well, and you could probably flip it too and just say, regardless of results, which one are they going to enjoy more?
yeah, yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
that imagine if they were trying to do both rather than the deca in January and the beast in November. If a person's doing training that's like, able to be incorporated and it's a slow progression, there's
Hmm.
built-in recovery, they're probably not going to be, first off, they're probably not going to get injured
Yeah.
as likely, and they're going to like start to enjoy the training, look forward to, rather
Hmm.
than being this kind of like masochistic, horrible experience where they're,
Turn into a job, right? It's work, right?
right. Yeah. And I think that the people that oftentimes do better, they have that quality of enjoying it too. It's not just they're good at it.
Mhm.
They like look forward to it.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
that's like that's in that that's got to be great for you when you see somebody who's like really seeing results, but they're actually happy and enjoying the results. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's so cool, like, getting to host these events. Like I don't get to race them as much as I want because I'm usually just stressed and exhausted from running the event, but I get to see like PRs all the time, whether it's 30 minutes strong or like you guys putting up. And for the record, I want to make sure everybody knows you guys ran a 14:06.6, but we had to, they made us round to the nearest second. So I just want to throw it out there that you were 14:06. But anyway, I get to see these cool things and how cool it is when somebody finishes their last burpee and here's their time. And that they do that because they've been training and they've been training specifically for this and putting in very specific work. And if you're just doing it to do it, you're not gonna, hey, it might just feel great to finish, right? Around the same time every time. But to finish with a PR is different than just finishing, you
Oh,
know?
it's that psychological aspect, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Well,
Sorry, real quick, you meant the psychological piece. It just made me think of, I think they come together, right? Where your training builds on, like kind of like you were saying, because like going back to I was doing more for the past, I don't know, 3 months. I wanted to switch up my training and I was doing more like heavier lifting, more not bodybuilding, but I was trying to put on a little bit of muscle and just that's what I wanted to do. I didn't have any particular races I was going to be training for. I'm like, this is the time I can work on this stuff. And, but I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do the race. So, but then it almost built up excuses for me, right? And then I start telling, well, I'm not training for this. I'm not going to PR. I'm not going to do that well. And if even if I'd been doing some training, right, I feel like it would have built my psychological confidence and belief, like you said, like I believe I can do this. Sure, maybe I wasn't training as hard as I could, but I was putting in some time to get better. And I was just almost making an excuse for myself, like, well, I didn't train for this. I'm not going to do well. And that's what I was saying. When it got hard, and you saw exactly when that happened, I threw in the towel. Like I finished, but I just couldn't dig deep and I didn't want to be there anymore. And I'm like, I'm gonna finish. I know I'll finish. But 2 minutes slower than my PR, and it's is what it is.
yeah, and I think that whether it's YouTube or it's actually going to someone like you, or even like let's say Glenn was coaching or what have you, um, and really listening to them about how to not put it just on your shoulders.
Hmm.
That's been so helpful for me to be an active listener to people. Because if you were to tell somebody that and you were curious and they gave you the response, well, what if you just, approach that a little bit differently, Mike,
Hmm.
psychologically? And you'd be like,
Yeah,
oh, what if, and then the psychological leads a little bit of the action, right? You start maybe making some different choices. And then you could, it's not to say that like you'd be happier with yourself, but maybe you would have been happier with your performance and you would have enjoyed the process a little bit differently.
for
And I
sure.
think
Yeah.
sometimes we get habituated in doing these things. And again, like I I think people can get better, man. Like I think hybrid racing is first off, it's good for your health. The
Hmm.
evidence has come back very conclusively that I've been curious, but strength training is really good for your health. Now
Hmm.
you only need so much, but it's still good for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Physical activity, really good for your health. So when you apply that to also like people like to look good, people like to fit in their clothes, right?
Yeah.
People like to push themselves at all ages. It's like this is a great sport for people in their 30s and 40s, and you can get really good, and it feels good. You look like it's nice to have something to look forward to. Like imagine if you were looking forward to that versus like you probably weren't really looking forward to it, were you?
No, yeah. I was like, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna do it. That's like literally the things I was saying before the race. Like, 'cause everybody's like, you racing, you racing. I'm like, yeah, yeah, I'm gonna do it. It
Yeah.
wasn't like, yep, here we go. Who's judging me? It was like, all right, let's get this over with. And I hate to admit it, but that's how it was. But now look at, fast forward a couple weeks, my training now, I'm already flipping the switch. It's like, okay, I was doing that training long enough. I wasn't happy with how that all went. And I don't know when my next race will be, but I'm already switching gears. Like, okay, I did that long enough. Now I do want to be ready. So if you told me, hey, there's a race in a month, like I can get on it, right?
Totally.
And be ready to go versus where I was before. And I was like, nah, nah. Yeah, but it is what it is. So you learn, right? You do it, you suffer a
Absolutely.
little bit, and I wasn't happy, so just gonna turn it around and see how it goes.
Totally. So, and hopefully people that are listening to what you're saying, take that as a very humble, uh, like learning, and I've definitely had very, like what you just described. I've gone through that almost identically with a variety of things throughout my life. And it's like taking that failure, that suffering experience, and really like incorporating it as a valuable learning lesson, and like, try to remember it, and not think you're above it just because, like, you've learned something. That you could easily replicate that experience if you fell back into the old habit. So
Yeah,
I think that there's something really valuable about you putting that information out there, this information out there, because there's a lot of people that are very available to wanting to get better.
for sure, for sure. Well, you guys both gave a ton of amazing information, and I know anyone listening to this is gonna really help if they take this to heart and apply some of these things. But I've taken a lot of your time. I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, for sure,
Again,
Mike.
I know you've done this before, so I really appreciate it. And good luck to both you guys at Worlds. I'm excited to see what you guys can do.
Oh yeah, I'm really excited too. Last
Yeah,
year I laid an egg, man. I had one of my worst races of the year, and so this year I'm hoping to like not have that happen again. So I'm training. I've changed my approach a little bit because of that. So we'll see.
awesome, awesome,
All right,
perfect.
buddy.
All right, thanks again.
See you, buddy.